ever more angry and extreme in their views and ever more practiced at using violence. Is that a threat to us? Yes, self-evidently it is.
The most talked about radio show is here. Call Clegg. 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Leading Britain's conversation. This is Call Clegg with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
It's 9:30 on the 28th of August, and that means it's time for a new season. A new season, how about that? Of Call Clegg with me, Nick Clegg, here on LBC, with, of course, Nick Ferrari, taking your questions for the next half an hour. So if you want to get in touch, call on 0345 6060 973 or email at nickclegg@lbc.co.uk. And as ever, you can watch on the website lbc.co.uk. Let's go to the first caller, Andrea in Marylebone. Hello, Andrea.
Hi, I just wondered, could you please outline concrete steps government is taking to bring the competent authorities to book, to make them accountable for what has happened in Rotherham and similar such cases?
Well, firstly, I think the people who, in this harrowing, and it really is an utterly harrowing report, I haven't read it all yet, but I've read enough of it to feel as sickened as anybody else at the suffering of so many children, and the blatant neglect by the people who are there to protect them, people in the council, social service, children's services, the police, who just turned a blind eye, just turned their backs on some of those vulnerable people in society. Those people in the first place should feel a sense of responsibility to accept that they were in positions of authority where they could have protected these children, and this report says very clearly and unambiguously, as by the way did a couple of previous reports in previous years, that they did not do their job properly. And that's why, the first thing is that people who were...
You addressed the actual question yet.
Well, as I said,
I'm asking.
Well, Andrea, I know what you're asking, and I am answering the question, Andrea.
It is not. Give some background, and then we'll move on.
It's not for central government to say to individual. We don't run Rotherham Council, for instance. Rotherham Council is elected by the councillors are elected by local people. It's run, quite rightly, by local people, and the officers in Rotherham Council are accountable to the councillors there. So that's why I answered you, Andrea, directly, which is it isn't, I'm afraid, something where central government can point a long finger, as Theresa May said. She can't tell the Police and Crime Commissioner, who clearly should do the decent thing and stand aside. She can't tell him to do so. All we can do, which is what I'm doing now, which is what I think everybody is doing, across parties, by the way, is to say, please, do the decent thing, stand aside because you have to take responsibility, and then let's try, with the police, of course, South Yorkshire Police taking the lead, to go after the perpetrators, because a lot of these perpetrators of this abuse are still walking free.
It is not either or. The fact is the perpetrators were allowed to systematically get away with what they did, and the authorities are accountable for that, and the government shapes the framework within which the competent authorities are obliged to act or not. So it's not a question of either or. That is why you are the lawmakers, and there's no point having laws if the competent authorities do not actually follow through.
Well, that's a slightly different matter about laws, isn't it, Andrea? Because, of course, the perpetrators committed terrible crimes, and it's for the police now to take the lead in using this report in as much as they can, and the evidence that is still available to them, and, of course, based also on the willingness of the many, many victims still to come forward, to go after the perpetrators. You're quite right. Of course, the wheels of justice must now turn. But also, as you know, that's one of the reasons how law applies to all of this. Why some MPs are saying that sort of criminal law needs to be applied to the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner. So yes, you're right. Law stands there. But I think the starting point, Andrea, is that people who were in positions of authority could have protected these children. Didn't. They should now take responsibility for having failed to do so.
So Sean Wright should go.
Yes, of course.
What of Joyce Thacker, who is the Director of Children's and Young People's Services, when she said, and I'm quoting, "I would put responsibility back on the parents. It's their duty to protect their child and keep them safe. We couldn't be with them 24 hours a day."
Is
she onto something there?
No, I don't think she is, because my understanding...
So there is no parental responsibility?
Of course, every adult who has in their care vulnerable children who are being abused as they were by these gangs, by these individuals, of course has a duty. But let's remember, a lot of these children, at least that is my understanding of the report, a lot of these children were known to social services already, were known to the police already. In fact, a number of the children went to the police, pleaded.
As did parents.
Yeah, as did parents. So I just think the worst thing now for people who are in positions of responsibility is to start appearing, at least, to pass the buck. It's such an indignity on top of the kind of harrowing abuse that these children have suffered. And also, in a way, it gets in the way of what we now want, which is the South Yorkshire Police to do the job that they didn't do, and they've apologised, they failed to do that, which is now to listen to the testimony of those children and go after the perpetrators.
Do you have confidence in the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire Police?
Well, I want the South Yorkshire Police now to do the job that they didn't do before.
Rather more excited in trying to get into Sir Cliff Richard's home in Berkshire. That seems to interest them far more, doesn't it?
Well, they're coming before a committee of MPs, as you know, to talk about that, as is the BBC. But on this, the report could not have been more. It didn't pull its punches. I mean, it said very clearly the police, the council, the children's services, all of those people whose job it was to listen to these children, to protect these children. And as I said, a lot of these children were known to them already, didn't do so, and there's no excuse for that. No sensitivity around cultural sensitivities are ever an excuse to turn away from very vulnerable children who are being subject to such harrowing abuse.
And lastly on this for now, there is an idea that a different police force should actually go in there and look at the possibility of prosecuting some of the council officials, possibly even some of the police officers, almost on a case of lack of corporate responsibility. How do you react to that idea?
Well, it's an interesting idea, but because there is always an issue, isn't there, when an organisation fails in its duties, and all organisations
spectacularly fails in this one.
Certainly in this case, spectacularly failed, and is also the same organisation that's supposed to remedy those failings. And these are not, by the way, ancient cases. These are cases which, are going on, under our very noses, so to speak, in Rotherham over the last several years. So I do think there is a real issue which South Yorkshire Police will need to reflect on hard, is how do they get in sort of new people with a fresh pair of eyes who can really do the job properly and who feel that they've got absolutely no vested interest at all in somehow sort of not going to the nth degree to find out what happened and to deliver justice.
Let's move on to other callers. Deputy Prime Minister
Stuart in Holborn. Stuart?
Good morning. Good to have you back.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
The whole country agrees with what you've just said.
Thank you, Stuart.
One quick thing. The jihadists returning, the ISIS little mob, do you agree with me, every right-minded person in the country and the Commissioner of Police and many MPs, that these people should have their passports seized, their citizenship removed and not let back under any circumstances whatsoever?
Yeah, I think we should have the power to take people's passports away who we think are going to go and spill blood in pursuit of this hateful ideology in other parts of the world. And we actually took on new powers, the coalition government, which kicked in April of last year to do that. We've taken, I think, taking 23 passports away from individuals already. We also put new powers on the statute book, which is the other side of the coin, if you like, Stuart, to make pursuing terrorist activities outside Britain a crime within Britain. And again, that we've been using those new powers. So we've been strengthening the powers available to us to stop, and it is unfortunately often young men from British communities who, for one reason or another, whose heads have been turned by this baleful, nasty, medieval ideology, from going over there in the first place, and then, of course, a greater risk to us, then coming back and inflicting further violence on British streets.
That's the key. What are those who've already gone then? Should they have their passports revoked effectively in absentia?
Oh, I think if I've only just got off a plane, having been for a few days leading a trade delegation in India. But one of the first things I'm doing when I get back behind my desk, so to speak, is to look at what more we can do to revoke and remove passports from people who clearly are travelling for no purpose other than wishing to inflict violence on others and pose a direct threat to us. I didn't agree with all of what Bernard Hogan-Howe said yesterday, but on that I actually think that is something where we need to look with an open mind about whether the powers we've already recently taken on.
So effectively, they won't come back, these people.
If we can keep them out, if we can stop people travelling out there in the first place, yes. and people who've travelled out, stop them coming back, if we can, of course we should do that.
By taking away their passports.
Absolutely, and we should look at the powers that we have available. As I said, we've created new criminal offences. In other words, we've criminalised what remarkably wasn't a criminal offence before. In other words, travelling abroad to pursue violent or terrorist offences. We made that an offence in British law. That's relatively new. We've taken on these new powers to take people's passports away. But I'm very open-minded about looking at more ways in which we can stop this traffic of people back and forth from this crucible of violence in Iraq and Syria.
Quick response from you, Stuart.
Thank you very much. I agree with everything you said.
Well done. That's nice to hear. Just before I let me move on, Deputy Prime Minister, how confident are you in the effectiveness of TPIMs, terrorism prevention and investigation measures? Also in the interview on LBC yesterday, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe, said that possibly a look at something like, he didn't say a control order, but something like the old control orders. Your view?
Well, I think there's been a bit of sort of misapprehension and confusion about this. If I felt that control orders, or call it by another name, was going to be some catch-all solution to the threat of ISIL, then of course I would, I'd look at it very seriously. But what people have to remember is control orders were a deeply flawed way of doing things. And I've just got some figures here which are just worth remembering. 43 people who were put on control orders actually came off them, either because their control orders ran out, or they were revoked, or, as kept happening, they kept being quashed by the courts, or they absconded. 7 people actually absconded from control orders during the 6 years in which they operated, and only one of those 7 people ever found again. So what happened was the previous government found they had these control orders, and what were control orders? Control orders are a means by which you sort of try and keep an eye on someone, try and control the movements of someone who you kind of know is dangerous, but you haven't got the evidence in a way that you can sort of bang them up behind bars. That's the dilemma. That's the gap you're trying to fill, and it just didn't work. The courts kept slapping it down. People kept sort of absconding. As I said, 43 people were on control orders. So we replaced it with a terrorism prevention and investigation.
How effective are they, Deputy Prime Minister?
Well, the courts have said that they are much more legally sound. So we don't have this constant run around in the courts where they keep being quashed. 2 successive independent reviewers of counter-terrorism legislation have said that they're effective. And let's remember, these are not soft instruments. They allow the police and the authorities.
They're softer than a control order.
No, hang on.
Prime Minister.
Let's explain this. They means that people under these measures, these terrorism prevention investigation measures, they're tagged. They can be excluded from going to certain places. They can be stopped from travelling abroad. They can be told they obviously have to stay at home.
They're allowed to use a mobile phone.
But there can be conditions on that. Conditions on where they work and where they study. Yeah, they have to report to the police. So
they can apply to the courts to go away from their home to stay wherever they wish to go.
They can apply to the courts.
So they could all, for the purpose of debate, they could all go to Luton.
If they all want to go to Luton.
Which is not necessarily a good place to be, as there are problems of extremism in that area. Whereas the old control order restricted them, and the police knew where they were. As they do under these. It's a complete myth. Move.
No, it's a complete myth. They're tagged, for heaven's sake. They're tagged. They have to report to the police wherever they are.
So where is Ahmed Mohammed, who escaped from Acton in West London in November 2013? He's still on the lam, isn't he?
He is still on the run.
Where's Ibrahim Magag, who went on the lam on Boxing Day 2012? He's still on the run as well, isn't he?
And this is, but
they don't seem to be working very well there, Deputy Prime
Minister. This is the issue, and this is the problem with control orders. Here's the bottom line. If you want to make us completely safe from these people, the best thing to do is to lock them up, right? And that's why, as I say, we've actually taken on new powers, new laws. If people break those laws, we get them in court, we get them before a judge and jury, and they get behind bars. That's the best thing. There is a small number of people we're talking about here where we know that they're dangerous, but we can't, for one reason or another, marshal the evidence to get them behind bars. It's a very, very kind of tricky thing. It's like, say, in other words, we can't throw the full force of the law at them, but we also want to keep an eye on them. And as I say, terrorism prevention investigation measures, they're not some soft measure. We know exactly where they are. People have absconded, as they did, several people did under control orders. The difference is these measures haven't constantly been challenged in the courts. They've stood much more legally secure. We haven't had to let people go because courts have told the government to do so, which is what happened under control orders.
In a couple of cases, they've gone of their own accord in a couple of cases.
Yeah, I know. But look, what I'd like is for us to take all of these people, get them in a court, and get them behind bars, right? But I'm realistic enough and pragmatic enough, and I care as much as anyone else about the safety of the British public, that sometimes you need to take these unorthodox measures, which is what both control orders and terrorism prevention investigation measures are, to make sure that you keep an eye on them. Then there's the debate about exactly how you design them. But I really want to get away from this idea that somehow either the old control orders were a catch-all solution, they weren't, or that the new TPIMs are somehow very weak measures. They're not.
All right. We move on to other questions. Mr. Clegg.
Chris in South Croydon. Hello, Chris.
Oh, good morning, Deputy Prime Minister.
Morning.
Yes, my question is, what would you consider to be an acceptable net immigration rate, annual net immigration rate for Britain, bearing in mind that as long as we're in the EU and signed up to the Strasbourg Court, we've no power to limit it?
Well, I've always, and I've been asked this before, Chris, I've always felt that chasing a net immigration target makes no sense, which is why I've always disagreed with the way that Conservatives... Do you remember they always used to say, we're going to commit to a net immigration target of tens of thousands? And I kept saying, don't do that, because you're not going to be able to deliver it, because you can't control quite a lot of it. And it's also a slightly meaningless target. You could have 1 million people leave this country, 1 million people come in, and hey presto, you've met your target of no net immigration. So I don't think it makes a great deal of sense. What I want instead is an immigration system which people have confidence in, because people's confidence in our immigration system has been very, very badly shaken over many, many years. It's got to be tough against illegal immigration, against the loopholes in the system, against criminality, against people coming here and being employed by rogue employers in the sort of grey areas of our economy. I want to see exit checks properly restored, so we count people out as well as we count people in. I've been the most active proponent in government saying we've got to reinsert those checks which were removed by previous governments. But we've also got to be smart. I've just come back from India. There are lots and lots of brilliant Indian engineers, IT specialists, people who would give great benefit to our country if they were to come here for a certain period of time, who I think we should welcome on legitimate visas. So tough but smart, tough but fair, that's the way to proceed. I don't think pursuing these, which is why, by the way, the Conservatives now appear to have U-turned and have gone very quiet on that net immigration target, because they realise, I think, their mistake. I don't think just holding up one artificial net target like that makes much sense.
Quick response.
You don't think Britain's overpopulated then?
I think there are parts of Britain where the population pressure is much greater than others, self-evidently.
No, as a scientific concept, Britain is overpopulated. If you say Britain is not overpopulated, you're saying just the same that water is HO3, that the sun goes around the earth, and that iron ships won't float.
Well, I suspect we're going to part company at this. When you say it's a scientific...
Your way, and I represent the most people in this country.
Yes, no, but sorry, you just when you said there was a scientific proof that it...
Yes, because you're overpopulated when the lifestyle of your inhabitants imposes an excessive strain on the ecosystem of any land mass, which ours does. London's rubbish alone fills the Albert Hall from top to bottom every day, for example.
Yeah, but you could have a country which is very underpopulated, but everybody lives, let's say, in one small corner of it. Clearly that one small corner's got a problem.
That is overcrowding. You don't seem to know the difference between overcrowded and overpopulated. You hold a first-class honours university degree. God help us.
Well, Chris, you seem very worked up. I don't have a first-class honours degree, as it happens. But secondly, you were talking about overcrowding because you were referring to London and the waste problem in London. But look, I think you and I are going to disagree on this. I don't think it is. I don't think it makes any sense to pretend to the British people that you can solve everything by meeting a net immigration target over which we don't have that much control.
And the new season,
the voice of reason, the voice of reason, Nick Ferrari is intervening.
We hope the new season will be more Chelsea than Manchester United, I think. Right, we move on. Joe's in Catford. Joe, you're on the radio.
Hello, Joe.
Yes, I took that question.
Hi there. How are you, Nick?
Yeah, I'm all right, Joe. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much. My question is, do you think the government's doing enough to protect us from deadly viruses such as Ebola?
Well, I think we're doing the way that that young British nurse, Pooley, is it?
William Pooley.
William Pooley is being treated, by all accounts.
Royal Free in London.
By all accounts, his family and friends say he's being treated absolutely brilliantly, and he's
praise.
He's doing really well. Well, not only nothing but praise for the NHS, but also nothing but praise for him. He sounds like a remarkable individual. And Joe, look, I think there are the NHS. And other organisations are in a state of sort of heightened vigilance about Ebola. It's a terrifying disease, given the effect it has clearly in parts of Africa. The race is on to try and find a cure for it. Some people who suffer from Ebola, recover. There are these experimental drugs which are being used. I think William Pooley is actually using them.
Yes, he is.
At the moment. So, we can't be in any way complacent, but I'm confident that the NHS in particular is being effective and vigilant.
Let's move to a couple of emails. Thank you for that. This comes in from Graham in Bushey. Lord Renard is back in your party. You're also advocating sex and relationship lessons. If Renard had had some as 7, do you think it might have stopped him behaving so appallingly with those 4 Lib Dem women? What does it take to be kicked out of your party?
Well, look, I can't. I'm not going to sort of rehearse the whole.
Are you pleased to see him
lengthy saga? He's the committee which looks at this in the Lib Dems, and look, I know some people might find due process lengthy or boring, but it's actually important. It's important that these things are looked at. And in Renard's case, it was looked at by the police. It was looked at by an independent QC. It was then looked at by a number of committees within the Liberal Democrat Party. A mediation process was organised as well. So this is a lengthy process. I remain as distressed as anyone that there were a number of women who felt that they had been treated in a way which they found wholly unacceptable, and that their cries for help, if you like, were not reacted upon at the time, and they had to go public with that later. He's not going to play any role in the general election campaign. He has issued an apology, and that's why the decision of that committee was as it was.
My question was, are you pleased to see him back?
Well, look, I recognise, I just accept the process as it was. I accept the decision as it was. I'm very keen that everybody.
The word is pleased.
I know. You wish me to use your words. But
yes or no. I welcome him back with open arms.
Given we're now in the 3rd season of this series, I think you'll be familiar with the fact I sometimes use my own words.
Well, you do. It's something I can't get you to drink, even though I take you water.
But the really big thing is this. Look, we've taken a long, hard look in the mirror as a party.
So you're not displeased?
I am. I'll tell you what. I absolutely believe the party has changed. I think we've obviously, there's been a lot of soul searching about what went wrong, a lot of soul searching about why these women's complaints were not acted upon in a way that they felt should have happened much earlier. We've now massively changed the way we do things in the party. This has been scrutinised, as I say, by the police, by an independent QC, by several committees within the party. I've also asked for my initiative that there should be a change in the rules. In other words, the burden of proof which is applied to these kind of cases should be changed in the future. An independent barrister has also looked at that, recommended that should happen. That hopefully will now be taken forward. So I think this has been a very distressing time for the party and a very distressing episode for the party, but I think actually it's left the party in a stronger position because we have changed and changed significantly.
Do I try one last time?
No, don't try again.
Should we move on to other questions then? No, you take control. It's called Clegg.
Layla in Abbey Wood. Hello, Layla.
Good morning, Deputy Prime Minister. Thank you for taking my call.
As loud as you possibly can, Layla. You've got a lovely voice, but just really shout your question because I've got you at maximum level. Thank you.
I just woke up, sorry.
Oh, right. It's 10 o'clock, Layla.
The Deputy Prime Minister's just got off a plane. We're not here for excuses, Layla. We're here for questions.
Were you working late, Layla, or what?
No.
Come on, tell the nation. What excuse do you have?
My little one is ill.
Sorry. Okay,
God bless him or her.
Okay. Boris Johnson lately said that he wanted to stand to become an MP.
Yeah.
And then straight after he was quoted saying that habeas corpus should be taken out of the law books for certain people who are coming back from Syria. Do you think with these sort of dangerous ideas, anyone should take them seriously, or should be allowed to become MP, not just an MP,
Okay.
Prime Minister, because that's the end game.
You think that's his end game? Stay on the line, Layla.
Oh,
Mr. Clegg.
Layla, well, we talked before about Boris Johnson's insatiable political ambitions, and I think no amount of tousled hair can camouflage his ambitions.
What's his end game, Mr. Clegg?
I don't know. You'll need to. You know better than I do. He's on your programme every week. Layla, you should ring. When is he on?
Tuesday.
Layla, ring back on Tuesday, Layla, and ask him the question, because I think, to be honest, you can get the answer from the horse's mouth. I don't happen to agree with some of the things that Boris Johnson said in his recent Telegraph article. Incredibly, obviously serious though the ISIL threat is, but more generally, my experience.
But you are happy with the idea of suspending passports?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. As I say, we take passports away already.
Okay.
No. Look, I'm no slouch from this at all. Look, I think just sorry, Lady. Before we moved from Boris Johnson, can I just say on this issue, because it is one of the biggest security threats that our nation now faces, these kind of hateful people in ISIL, and they're drawing in. Fanatics and particularly young men from around the world, not least from Britain. I think we need to obviously work with the Americans and others constantly to see what we can do to help with the humanitarian situation, to help in whatever way we can or should to stop the military advance of ISIL, particularly in northern Iraq. But we also, and we need to look at some of the powers which we've just discussed earlier in this programme. But we also need to remember that the best antidote to some of these hateful ideas taking root in our communities is the people of the mainstream British Muslim communities themselves, and we have to work hand in glove with them. They are as horrified, if not more horrified, in my experience, than anyone else, that their religion, their cherished religion, Islam, is being as sort of perverted and turned inside out as much as it is by these violent extremists. But Layla, back to Boris Johnson. Look, my experience in politics is that you in a sense the best bit in politics is where you can kind of mouth off about stuff left, right, and centre, and you don't really have to take responsibility for anything you say. He's in that phase at the moment in his political career, and it's great fun for him because he can go around and he can just kind of say whatever he likes. He doesn't really have to stand by any of the words. Doesn't really need to think it through, and it's not scrutinised very much. But as I have discovered, probably more dramatically than anybody, when you then step up to the plate and have to do stuff, it's a completely different matter. And one day, I hope Boris Johnson is actually tested, because I think just talking the talk is one thing. You need to walk the walk as well.
Would he be a good Prime Minister?
I've got a face idea. I think the leaders of the Liberal Democrats, both now and in the future, would always make the best Prime Ministers.
I think we might say that. We move on to other calls.
Noah in Swansea.
Hello. I'm just want to ask you, do you realise that making sex education compulsory for 7-year-olds in all state schools not only robs them of their innocence, but will also encourage earlier sexual activity amongst 8 and 9-year-olds? And will you please stop pursuing this agenda of cultural Marxism with its theories of pansexualism and polymorphic perversion?
Pansexualism, polymorphic perversion. I have been accused of many things in my time, Noah, but nothing as polysyllabic or as contorted sounding as that.
Spell it.
No, I so utterly and totally disagree with you. Look, we're not. I've seen some ridiculous headlines that sort of Lib Dems going to teach 7-year-olds how to use condoms. They're rubbish. Total, utter bilge.
What is the truth?
What we're saying is, and you to ask any teacher, ask any parent, that if you really want our children to grow up as responsible young adults, understanding the risks that are around, for instance, the risks of online bullying and explicit sexual imagery on online, you've got to start talking to people about relationships, about emotions, about how you interact with each other from an early age. We are not prescribing exactly what is taught when. We can easily have a bunch of people look at that and make recommendations. But at the moment, you've got sexual education guidance, which is way out of date. You'll remember these young women who, in fact, I think we talked about this on this show some months ago, who were saying quite rightly, why on earth is it that the whole online threat, particularly to young girls, of sexual intimidation and bullying and so on, is not properly incorporated into those guidelines. They need to be revised, and we need to allow all schools to do actually what a lot of very sensible schools do anyway, which is in an age-appropriate way talk to young children, and far, Noah, from somehow unlocking some sort of frenzy of promiscuity, which you seem to fear, which I think is an extraordinary assertion to make about children. What you think the moment you start talking to them about each other and how they interact with each other, they're suddenly going to sort of descend into some sort of bout of promiscuity. Far from that, all the evidence shows, and I believe in evidence now, and not just these wild assertions that you're making, the evidence shows that that's the best way to protect our children and, for instance, to bring down unwanted pregnancies, which are still at far too high rates in our country.
We're coming to the final minute. Just lastly, you've very kindly come straight here from the airport. I'm actually going to take the final question. You've come back from a trade delegation to India, Deputy Prime Minister. You took some businessmen and women over there. What did you learn?
Well, I learned that, I think India is like it sounds like a cliche, but it's like a sleeping giant economically. It's this massive country, 1.2 billion people, 70% of whom are under the age of 35. Can you imagine?
That's phenomenal.
It's phenomenal. I was
incredible young country.
Producing hundreds of thousands of engineers and IT scientists every year. A passion for learning. That's the other thing. I went to a few colleges. I did sort of question and answer sessions with some school kids. There's this absolute wonderful belief in the value of education. I heard about parents who got nothing, absolutely nothing, and are just scrimping and saving to whatever they can gather together to give their daughters and their sons a good education. I was in Bangalore yesterday. Bangalore is going to be the sort of new Silicon Valley, what it already is in many respects. So I think if we can, given that we're already the world's, out of the G20 countries, Britain invests more in India than any other G20 country. India.
How much are the trade deals worth then in India?
Oh, they're a lot. They're a lot. We trade about 16. Well, it's about 60. It's about our trade relations about £16 billion per year.
And do they look favourably on us? There's genuine affection.
India invests more in the United Kingdom than India invests in the rest of the whole of the European Union put together. So we've got this... we obviously share...
Who needs Europe, eh?
Well, we share... Well, actually, if you really want to get me onto that, partly the reason, of course, they invest in Britain is because they can then go on and train Europe.
Here we go.
You think I've changed just going to Asia and back?
I thought the holiday might have calmed you down a bit.
There are some old theme tunes which don't change.
Right.
Look, I think it's fantastic. We've obviously got this shared history, language, literature. We understand each other. I think there's massive opportunities there, and it was a great visit.
The new season has begun. Deputy Prime Minister, thank you. I hope you next week back at the usual time.
Yes.
Call Clegg here on LBC. I'm done. I'm back with you tomorrow. Meantime, stay safe.
Thank you, Nick. The time has just gone 10 o'clock, actually, and we'll begin this morning with a story that dominates both the news agenda and, I suspect, your thinking. It would be a little crass, a little simplistic, not to mention predictable.